Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure.
So, welcome Alice Mabin to the Adventures of Self.
Thank you for having me on.
Very, very excited to have you on. Well, there's a lot that I want to get into, but first of all, just to say that you are guest 25 or episode 25. So I feel like I've kind of reached, I don't know what, is that like diamond or crystal or some kind of milestone? Anyway, it feels like a really
quarter of a century.
Yeah. Well, quarter of a year at least. It's really special, and we've been talking for a good while to create this. So I'm really excited to get into this. I know we have a lot to discuss, a lot of adventures to share and to create. And I'll just take a little bit to maybe just introduce listeners to you, because there's I don't really know where to start. Like, first of all, we met in Africa, and I think we're going to get into that story. But how do you? I mean, you've published one book, a memoir about yourself. You've published 4 photography books about rural life in Australia. You're a speaker. I mean, how do you describe yourself, except as a kick-ass kind of like do all sorts of amazing things woman?
Do you know, to this day, Taylor, I still struggle to introduce myself to things, because I'm a very humble person, and I would like to tell people I'm just a jack of all trades. And a lot of what I've done is all just very much self-taught and tuning in to my, creative spirit to follow what feels really right for me. So I guess I'm an entrepreneur, and it encompasses so many different things, and I think we're now getting to a stage where the word entrepreneur is actually really well received. Probably back when I started, it wasn't so well received, and people probably looked at you sideways and thought it was fluffy. But yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'll take on anything.
Yeah, I think that's probably more, because I think entrepreneur kind of like also can feel like a bit limited almost now. Whereas what I get from you is that real sense of just taking on anything. I was listening to the audio version of your book, The Winding Road, and like almost from the get-go, right, there's just this adventurous kind of excited spirit to go out and do things, to try things, and to explore. And maybe that's why we connect, right? We have a lot in common. But even like going back to your time in New Zealand, riding horses, raising sheep. You have like, you really, when you have an interest in something, you get into it very thoroughly, completely, to I don't know if dominate it or just to understand it and to really experience it.
Yeah, that's right. I've always been a very, very passionate person, passionate about whatever I've been involved in. And from a very young age, horses was it. And I just lived and breathed horses. No matter what it was horses. And I guess I probably look at it now and think I'm very lucky. But when I was 15, I had an accident off a horse, and I spent 3 weeks in a coma, and I was resuscitated 3 times within the first week. And, the doctors said to my parents that I wouldn't survive, and if I did, I'd be a cabbage for the rest of my life, because I went without oxygen for so long. And to spend all that time in rehab, and to come back and do it and be a normal person and not be limited by, such an injury, I really took that experience and went, well, that wasn't my time, and I'm going to do everything I can while I'm here. And so I've just been so driven to experience so much stuff. And when I get into something and I'm, just solely focused on it, I kind of get a little bit tunnel visioned, because all I want to do is learn everything I can about it and experience it all and see all the different perspectives that different people and different situations have, especially when it comes to agriculture, because no two farms are the same. So learning about how, 50 people grow potatoes in 50 different ways is unbelievable. It's just a potato. No, it's not. And it's pretty easy to get lost in that.
It sounds like that could be what's his name? Those popular sort of sensual sexual books. You could have 50 Shades of Potato. Could be.
You could have 50 Shades of Potato. Yeah.
So I do want to go through a lot of your all of your adventures, but we spoke right when we were just about getting started before we started recording. How we met. So it's about, is it 2 or 3 years ago? I don't even know now. 2. Is it 2? I don't even know.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, the year before COVID. So yeah, 2019.
Right. Year before COVID. BC, right? We met in Africa. And so we were each on our own individual adventures. It was my second time to Africa. And even how you got to Africa in the first place, I think is sort of quite remarkable and magical.
Yeah, so obviously we've connected through doing the work with William Whitecloud, who I believe you'll have on at some point on your podcast. But, I was introduced to his work from another friend who gave me a book, and I was so taken by The Magician's Way. I looked this guy up and I was like, I've got to learn more about this. I've got to go through this. So, I ended up doing his courses here in Australia, and I was actually signed up for the 2020 trip to Africa, because it's always, very booked out. And I just happened to be, I was actually working in Perth at the time doing this contract, and I just happened to be on Facebook when William throws up this post about, a spare seat had come up, a spare ticket, and did anyone want it? And I said, I'll take it. And I just started a job, a contract job that I was doing, and, it was 2 days and we were leaving. And I thought, money wasn't an issue, but I didn't realize I needed to get a visa for it. And it was a Sunday and we were leaving on the Tuesday. So I raced down to the consulate in Perth on the Monday and said, I really need that visa yesterday. and managed to get it, and got on a plane and headed to Africa and took a couple of weeks off. And it was, it just changed my life. It was amazing. As a trip, met so many incredible people and just discovered so much stuff, and I think the two really big things I brought back from Africa is, if we could bring that non-judgment, side of Africa back to Australia and into sort of, more populated cultures like London and things, and that appreciation and that respect for the nature and for the wildlife, the world would be such a better place.
Yeah, it's true. There is this there's an openness that is inherent in. Certainly, I've traveled a little bit in sub-Saharan Africa in 4 or 5 countries, and everywhere you go, there's just an openness. And I have to say, I've lived in cities for a considerable part of my life: London, New York, Tokyo, and you kind of learn to be a little guarded. You learn to be a little, okay, what's this person want? Oh, does this person want money? Does this person want to sell me something? Does this person, and we, because there's so many people, we kind of learn to, have our blinkers on a little bit. And when you go to Africa, there, that kind of inherently comes up in me. And yet everywhere you go, at some point you have to say, oh, okay, right. Well, actually it's just genuine. Everywhere you go, it's the corner shop when you're 500 miles from the nearest town. It's in the middle of a big city. People are just generous. They're open. They have this like liveliness of, well, we're here on this planet. Let's live.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because that's not the experience that I've had in life so far, right? I'm in rural industry and I'm in the country, and everyone wants to offer you a bed to stay the night. You know, that's what I've grown up with. It's what I experience every day when I'm out there doing things. Oh, you're welcome to stay the night. And they're so welcoming, you know, of you into their families and in their livelihoods. And, you know, doing what I do for a living, people open up and tell me their stories, and I'm photographing their livelihoods and their worlds and their farms. And so it's not, I didn't see it in that same way. I very much felt at home in that environment, and I felt so safe in that environment. And, you know, and then coincidentally, we pulled into, I'm not sure if you were in our van or not, but we pulled into the petrol station to get some fuel when we left the first place that we stayed at, and in Swaziland. And the guy says, you know, is anyone from Australia here? And I said, well, yeah, I am. And he's like, oh, you know, I've got a son in Adelaide in the Navy, and a son that works for John Deere in Western Australia. And I was like, I work for John Deere in Western Australia. Who's your son? You know, and I knew the guy. What are the chances of that? But that's what I attract to me, right? That's the life I live now. That's what I experience. And so it didn't really blow me away that much, because it's kind of what I'm used to, you know, and that's what we do get really used to.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting hearing your side of things, because it started me to think, well, in a way, like I've created that experience for myself, and I can, you know, look back and trace back, like, well, where that started when I was a small child, and and it's not here to psychoanalyze myself, but I can see that as a creation. And what's really interesting, you know, you brought up William's work. I think maybe I'll try to have him on for like episode 50 or something like that. Right? Big one. I don't know if he'll be on. But you know, this work around sort of, you know, creative consciousness, and just being like bringing awareness to where you are in life, and choosing or deciding what is possible for you and actually going for it, right? One of the things that came out of what you were saying from the, you know, your choice to go to Africa, right? I think you inherently have this, and I'm definitely learning that one of the things about magic is you take action, or, you know, one of the things about just like being and experiencing life, whatever it is, like, you know, it doesn't have to be like, okay, I'm going to in 2 days leave for Africa. I mean, that's quite an amazing story, but it could just be like, well, in 2 days, I'm going to get my, you know, roof redone or something, because all of a sudden there's an opportunity, and it's about like seeing an opportunity and then taking action almost, you know, like when it's there, because it's very easy for us to see something and then go into, is this the right time? Is this, you know, what should, maybe I should do some more research. I mean, I can get very, very caught up in my head and think, oh, well, let me just research this for another couple of weeks. And then the opportunity's gone, right? The ticket's gone, the thing, whatever it is. And this happened time and time again for me. And for me and my own intuition, what I'm learning and seeing a lot is that if I stay open, there are so many, there's almost like an infinite number of connections that are available. And if I just stay open and choose which one I, you know, truly want to follow, you know, what's true, right? You learn to know what's true for you, and you take action on that. It then opens the next door and the next door and the next door, and it just becomes this, you know, kind of snowball of almost effortless things that that show up for you that are available.
That's right. But taking, like, seeing those opportunities and taking action and going, yeah, I'm going to do that, without, you know, overanalyzing and thinking it's not the right time, or I don't have the funds, or maybe I should research it more, is one thing. But the other side of that taking action is, just because, you know, you might have this vision and you don't necessarily know how to get there, you know, finding another way is and taking action, even though, you know, it's not something you've tried and tested, or someone says it's not possible to do it that way. That's, I think, just as important, to not follow the same beaten path that's always been followed, you know. And I've had some really interesting stories and adventures of that over my journeys of making my books. You know, when I was doing my second book, the truck book, The Driver, I wanted to get a billionaire businessman. His name's Twiggy Forrest, massive guy, is really worth looking up. He's the first guy in the world to use autonomous trucks on a commercial scale. So these are driverless trucks, right? And I really wanted to get him into one of my books, but he wouldn't return my emails or my phone calls. So that was the traditional way of getting hold of him. And then I happened to be somewhere where someone said that, you know, he only lived up the road. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and knock on his door. And so I went and knocked on this guy's door, and, well, he wasn't there, but his wife was there, and I explained why I was there, and I shoved a copy of The Drover in front of her, and she really liked it. And she said to me, well, you know, Twiggy would have done the same thing if people wouldn't return his phone calls or emails. I'll get him to call you. And a week later, I ended up at his mine and was photographing these massive autonomous trucks. And similarly, I had Qantas involved in the book to showcase the trucks that load airplanes with food. So Gate Gourmet, which, you know, we then eat the food when we're on the planes. And they pulled the pin on me at the 11th hour and put all this red tape up. And I happened to have a lady working for me out of Ireland at the time. And I sort of vented my frustration to her. And she said, oh, well, I've got a direct line to Richard Branson. Do you want to try Virgin Airlines? And I was like, yes. You know, so we put a call in, and of course we got the green light, and away we went. And so it is about, just staying open. And when you've got that vision and that's what you're trying to achieve, like, those other ways showed up for me. And it's not being scared to perhaps make contact with these people that are put on pedestals, and and we think, oh, we should, you know, they've got bigger things to do than deal with us. Like, they're just humans too, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I'm glad you shared the story about the airlines, because as I was speaking, right, I don't want to give the impression that I think life is about kind of just always just taking action just for the sake of it, right? One of the things that we learn, you know, it's taking right action and kind of having a sense of when that is. I think the Buddhists talked about, you know, taking right action, and have, you know, it's like there's a time to take action. There's also a time to sit back and take stock of things, and also to be aware, right, when there's other possibilities, right? You could get very caught up and think, well, I'm just going to do everything I can to the Qantas and, you know, make sure this happens because that's what it's supposed to be, and I'm not going to let this go. But to be open to something and have somebody say, oh, well, why don't we try this other option, right? Well, it's, you know, it's same, different, which gives you essentially the same result, or at least the sort of the same emotion, the same quality of result in a quicker, more efficient, more magical way is you know, quite special. And I think that skill of being able to discern what's there, what's truly possible. I want to.
For me, that action really comes from, you know, like I am an action woman, but that action is coming from purpose, right? Like, it's not just I'm not sitting around doing nothing and then something pops up and you're doing it because it's there and you're bored. Like, I'm never bored. I have a purpose and I'm going places and I'm doing something, and these things show up into my peripheral, and it's an opportunity. And yeah, sometimes you are turning it down because it's not the right thing at this point in time, but other times it is perfect. And if I was on the treadmill of life and being very routine based and doing that, perhaps I wouldn't be conscious to seeing that as the pathway to get to what I'm trying to achieve, you know?
I want to just bring in, because you mentioned a couple of the books. So just to give an overview, like how like, how did the adventure of, because now you've created 4 photography books, right? Yeah. And they all have their own theme, and they've taken, it wasn't just like, well, I'll just do 4 of them, and they came over a period of time. So I'm just curious about kind of the sort of the arc of that adventure. It's quite a large one, but just kind of.
So the first one was the drover. So I quit my job in a massive corporate company that I'd worked with for many years and traveled all over the world with. I just got to a point where I was like, I've got more than this to offer, and I wanted to work for myself, you know. So I resigned, and I brought a camera, and I, you know, thought, well, I'm going to become a professional photographer, because the world that I worked in was very much the stud world, and those were the people I dealt with. And I just felt that they really did a poor job at marketing these animals that they spend so much money growing and raising and breeding. And I thought, you know, I could really help them in this way. So that was what I was keen to get into. But when I brought my camera, I went out for a day to take some photographs of what was the biggest cattle drive in the world. So this one farmer purchased 18,000 head of cattle for nearly $8 million. And instead of trucking them down to his farm, he decided to walk them. So he engaged with a drover, which is a very old school way of moving stock. Like, it's what they did before we had trucks around. And they engaged a drover, and they walked these 18,000 cattle 2,500 kilometres. Wow. So the purchase was all done because of drought in the northern Queensland, and they were taking them down to central Queensland. And I just happened to go out for a day to take some photos, and got put on a horse and ended up staying. So I lived with these people for 9 months. I rode a horse every day. I swagged it on the side of the road and became part of the team. But being on a horse allowed me to get to places that I needed to be to get the best photographs to really tell the story, you know. But at that point, like, I had no vision of making a book. The book didn't come until out the other end of it, when I set up a Facebook page, of all things. So this is 2013. Alice is setting up her first Facebook page. And I put some pictures up, and people immediately, you know, wanted to buy them. They just connected with them and had seen nothing like it. And so from there, the idea of turning it into a book was born. And then, you know, publishers, when I approached publishers about it, they, you know, said to me, who would buy a book purely about droving cattle? And they just didn't realise the significance of this event and the historical aspect of it. You know, nothing like it has been done anywhere else in the world. And so I decided I'd self-publish. You know, I'd made this commitment, and I thought, I'm going to publish this myself. So I cleaned my bank account out. I actually took a screenshot of my bank balance, because I had $0.00 to my name. And then shortly after that, I found out that bookshops don't support self-published authors. And, you know, I just remember crying myself to sleep, going, I've just made the biggest mistake of my life. You know, what am I going to do? And everywhere I went, you know, I made this decision when the books arrived that I would travel back down the stock route through all the towns that the cattle went past, because I thought those people had a direct affiliation with the story, and surely they would want it, you know. And I got every excuse under the sun, you know. We're too poor, the book's, you know, too big, it's too expensive, we don't sell books, no one buys books anymore. Like, I just copped all of these beliefs and assumptions and things from people. And I really got to the point where I just struggled to walk into another shop and face another rejection, you know. And so I decided to give all the books away. So I gave these 1,000 books away, and then my phone started to ring, and people wanted more, you know, and I didn't have any more, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I ended up selling my car to pay to print more books. So at this point, you know, I'm carless, bookless, moneyless, jobless, restless. But I guess I never lost hope. You know, I was never hopeless. I always knew that I had something really good, and that for every shop, you know, that said yes to stocking my books, 9 more said no. So you copped a lot of it. But eventually I ended up, you know, really focusing on places that farmers and transport companies and things went to, because they're the types of people who were interested in my books, and they were the places they visited on a regular basis. And so they believed in my purpose as well, which was about, showcasing to industries that are taken for granted and helping to empower people who dedicate their lives to these industries, And when I shared that with them, people really got behind it and supported it. And so that's how the drover sort of kick-started it all. And then Shop said to me, you've got to do another book. At which point I was like, no, one was never on the cards. We're not doing two. And then, fortunately or unfortunately, some see the donut, others see the hole, but I was hit by a truck in my car and wrote my car off. And thankfully I wasn't hurt too bad, just a bit of whiplash. But I really sat back and reflected on that and looked at it. And it's really interesting that at different phases in my life where I get comfortable, something really pear-shaped happens to shock me out of my comfort and put me back on the razor's edge, to be really living an adventure instead of falling into that comfort place. And so this experience, then led me to deciding to hitchhike around Australia for 18 months in road trains and trucks, learning to drive trucks and understanding the life of a truck driver and what they do for communities, both in cities and in remote locations, to allow us to live the way we live, whether people are involved in transport or not, the clothes you're wearing, the earphones on your head, the seat you're sitting on, everything in your house, the computer you're talking to me on, it's all delivered on a truck, and we only hear bad stories about it when stuff goes wrong and take it for granted. So, it was a massive project, and it came with a lot of controversy because I wasn't from transport, and I didn't know about trucks, and I'd been hit by a truck, and they classified me as media, so they thought I was out to do something bad. So you had a lot of skepticism, the whole way through. But
yeah, I just want to. Really beautiful, amazing stories. Did you? Particularly on the first book, because that's quite a story and going through quite a lot. And in a way, it kind of goes against what we were kind of talking about earlier, where it's like, oh, I have something in mind, right? Because as you said, you didn't have it in mind to publish the book, and then that comes. Did you have a sense of what you wanted from that, or was it about like connecting with a part of who you are, right? Because one of the things that comes up for me is you were uniquely qualified in a way to do that, right? Yes, you chose to buy a camera and become a photographer, and I think in your book you speak about how you went and bought a bunch of equipment and said, oh, I'm going to become a professional photographer, and the guy who sold it to you was like, yeah, people don't just do that. And you're like, no, that's what I'm going to do, which is funny in itself. But as you said, right, then you're on this 9-month ride. And because you grew up on horseback, right, you're kind of in a way uniquely qualified for that. And it brings together, one of the things we talk about in terms of creating, it's making connections that haven't been made before. So, I've been on a horse and I can ride, but I don't know that I would be qualified to spend 9 months, on a horse and with a camera. And so it's just interesting, right? Because it brings together aspects of you. And that's one of the things we talk about in creating, because I think a lot of people, they look at creating and they see somebody else and they think, well, I could never do that. And it's like, yeah, because you're not that person with that experience. But
that's right.
But you and your experience, it's almost natural, effortless. And it's interesting to hear like the story about the driver, right? Because it comes from getting hit by a truck, which is obviously quite a traumatic experience, and then saying like, well, what does this mean? What's the lesson? What's the opportunity? It takes you to a deeper place to understand, well, what is this? We have trucks in our lives all all over the place. And as you say, most of us, everything, whether it's a small van, but it comes from trucks. It's particularly, I mean, here in the UK and Australia, right? It's things get put on a ship, and then those little tractor trailer containers get put on the back of a truck, and then they go off and deliver it to wherever it needs to go. And how ubiquitous that is as part of our life.
Yeah, it is. And I do look back, actually. I remember a lady, she was a professional photographer. When I was out there on that cattle drive, I didn't consider myself a professional photographer in the slightest means. I was just this girl that could ride a horse and could take a photo. I could see, I could visualize. I had this creative vision going on in my head. And when you sit behind a mob of cows for that long, it gets very hard to differentiate the mobs for someone like you or anyone else looking at the books, right? At the book or the photos. To them, it's just another mob of cows. So I had to get really creative about how to portray these people and their mobs of cattle to tell this journey of this trip. And I would wake up in the middle of the night with this vision in my head, and I'd write it down, because when I saw it as clearly as I saw it in my head when I was, asleep, I knew that it was going to come to fruition. It was just a matter of time. And there was this lady that came out as a professional photographer, and she said to me, she's like, I just can't understand you, like you've just picked up a camera and you can ride a horse and you can take a photo, and you can ride a horse and take a photo at the same time, and and it was classically that. It was a skill set that I had. So I've come from agriculture. I'd come from working with people in agriculture, and I understood that. And I was learning this new skill of how to take a photo and how to tell a story. And I was, bringing the two together to create what I created. And I think similarly with the truck book, I was naive. I think that naivety was in my favor, because I didn't go in there with a preconceived idea. I didn't go in there with an opinion and a judgment. I went in there completely open-minded with the purpose of telling their story in such a way that your everyday person, even if they hate trucks and are anti-trucks or whatever, or they're intimidated by them on the road, could actually turn any page in these books and read something and go, wow, I had no idea. And connect with it on a level of, wow, actually, I've got a bit more appreciation for that today. Like, I didn't realize that was the case. And so I wasn't trying to bang the drum for transport. I was trying to connect, transport and the general public with, hey, this is how you both need each other, and this is what it's all about, And I think having that inexperience was in my favor.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, one of the things we talk about, right, is that the innocence that when we let go of kind of our assumptions about the certainty of something, which is very apparent. I mean, you and I both come from a corporate background, and there's value in it, right? There's value in saying, well, this is how we've done things, and this is how we're going to do things. It kind of simplifies and makes things efficient on a certain level, but it's not creative. Right. And most creative endeavors, whether that's, a painting, a photography book, a new recipe, a date you're going to have with a friend or, a loved one, or like in industry, right, where something comes very, that disrupts, technology or something that disrupts how things are. It's because it kind of comes with that, like, well, I don't know. Why does, just because it was done like this up until now, like, that doesn't mean that's not Moses coming down with the written in stone from on high, right? That's just what's been done, right? But it doesn't mean that it's the best and way to do that, or to tell that story, or to for this particular technology. Like, Apple's kind of quite famous for this, right? Like, disrupted the IBM kind of like world, and the computers we have now. I mean, if you think back, like whatever it was, 30 or certainly 40 years ago, everything was kind of like that DOS kind of war games, very, very black screen, like pixelated
square boxes. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And there's a famous story of how Steve Jobs remembered a class that he had audited at college that had just sort of been a throwaway. He took a calligraphy class from this amazing Cistercian monk who was teaching a class where he went to school that he didn't really even care about. He just kind of thought, well, I'll just try this. And 10 years later, when he was developing the Mac, he kind of looked back and was like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. Why don't we bring calligraphy, typesetting, fonts, beautiful kind of presentation into a computer? And that's, and then kind of, Apple became kind of quite famous for, now it's like the graphics kind of go-to and standard. And there's countless stories like that. But I think your that naivete or innocence of like looking to create something new, and it's often it's just there's a strong foundation to it, right? You got to know how to ride a horse. Well, you've had decades of that. Taking a photograph in and of itself is a relatively, particularly now with digital cameras, is a relatively easy process. But the eye for it, right? And actually, as you say, like, visioning that, and then allowing that to transpire is really the opening of just choosing to do something in a creative way.
So when I photograph things, even to this day, but when I first started out, because obviously I'm in the digital world, not the film world, right? So it all seems like, oh, you just keep clicking and eventually you'll get a good one. I made a decision when I started photography that I was going to shoot as though I was using film. So, my time is precious to me, and every image that I had to edit or choose between 3, 5, 10 images of the same thing to edit is my time being chewed up. So I made a decision that I would always shoot like I was shooting in film. And if I stuff it up and I get home and I'm looking at it on my computer and it's wrong, I learn from it. And then when I'm going out and trying something similar or whatever next time, I make sure I think back to those things as opposed to just clicking away with it. But similarly, when I was designing the books and putting them together, none of them look closely the same, other than the font on the front cover is the same, and they're called The Grower, The Drover, The Driver, The Winding Road. They're all designed and put together really differently. And I actually spent hours going through books in a shop before I designed the drover. And when I went to my designer and explained what I wanted to achieve, I said, I learned something really big today when I was doing research. And she said, yeah, what? And I was like, I want my book to look nothing like anybody else's. That's all I can tell her. I was like, I don't want just a picture on a page. I want to create feeling and atmosphere, and I want people to feel like they're there with these drovers on this really long, hot, dusty, hard work journey that was just treacherous. I want people to feel that and experience it from the comfort of their homes without having to swat flies, and blow dust out their noses for weeks on end. I want them to really understand what we went through. And so through design on the page, we were able to do that. And then, of course, one of the most common things people would say to me when the drover came out was, I've never seen a book put together quite like it. And I think, that's just like the Apple story. Like, if we always do it the same way we've always done it, we'll always get the same result we got. And in fact, the marketing and the sales process, as all my books have gone along, has had to change every time because the market's changing. We've been experiencing massive drought here in Australia. We've had floods. We've had huge fires. Rural towns and people are very much tightening up on their spending because the money just isn't there. So you had to really get creative about how to put out you know, high-end, you know, quality books in an environment where people are just, you know, focusing on the necessities. And my books are not necessities, you know, they're wants, not needs. So it's a very challenging world to be in.
One thing that I want to pick up on in terms of like how you get into that, because I think it's something helpful for listeners to think about, you know, in terms of their own journeys, because you know, as you said, right, you've kind of been in agriculture or on farms pretty much your whole life, have that experience. And, you know, everybody else has their own individual experience. And what I find from creativity, from, you know, creating adventure for yourself, however you define that, whether that's going on a 2,500 kilometer cattle drove, or, you know, creating a family, or starting your own business, or being innovative in a company, or, you know, whatever it is, that there are things in you that are unique. That you're, you know, we do get caught up kind of in that comparison world. We see, you know, Facebook, Instagram, or, you know, you go look at other people's photograph books and you think, oh man, this one's really popular, I guess I need to do it like this. And, you know, really amazing insight to say, well, I don't want to be like anything like any of those, which is, you know, that's just your decision and choice. But the thing I wanted to bring up is because, you know, you talked about like working for John Deere and, you know, having other corporate jobs, and how, because you started saying, you know, you did that for a long time and then got to a point where, you know, just for you decided that wasn't for you. And there is this sense, I think, I don't know if I mentioned it recently on another podcast. I was talking to somebody about this recently. Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, in another book, I think it's in Turning Pro, but speaks about how often we are in shadow missions. So we talk about, like, you know, finding our true nature and purpose, and, you know, whatever it is that we're meant here to do and create. And people can really get kind of stuck with that. It's like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know, right? And we think it's like some massive thing that's like waiting, you know, over a mountain, and we have no idea what it looks like and feels like. And I really think it's interesting, because he says, it's like, well, look at what you're doing right now. Look at where you're actually, where does your interest lie? But maybe you feel frustrated. Like you're probably only one or maybe a few degrees off of where it is your truth is. Because, you know, somebody who grew up, I don't know, like, you know, in a city would never, well, unlikely to say like, oh, I'm going to go on a 2,500 kilometer cattle drive. Not just because it wouldn't even occur to them. They would just be like, yeah, okay, well, it's interesting. Like, I'd like to see a book about it, but there's nothing in them for that. And, you know, when, you know, our kind of our true mission is probably only one or a few degrees off from where we are, right? And it's actually, we're in the shadow of that. And if you imagine a shadow, right, when we're out in the sun and you see the shadow, it's like it's pretty close to you, but it's just a few degrees off from your real thing. And so often we are in a shadow mission that is close to what we really, really would love. But there's something about it, you know, whether it's working for something else, or, you know, whatever it is, that's unfulfilling. And when we start to really see that and tweak, you know, and to play around with that, you know, I say, like, you don't find your true nature and purpose. It's not like, oh, here it is. It's like underneath the covers, and, you know, it was hiding all along. You create it, right? And that comes from a bit of a stumbling, right? It's like, well, how does a child learn to walk? He or she creates that, right? And you fall down a bit, and, you know, like hearing your story about choosing to do this, choosing to be a photographer, and how you know, empty your bank account, can't sell any books, you know, or choose to create a book, can't sell any books, sell your car, right? You know, all these things, and then just say, well, okay, I'll just give it away, and how that opens things up. But there's a lot of kind of stumbling in that is creating your true mission, right? That kind of came from shadow mission, and then it was like, okay, let me go follow this path and create what's true.
That's absolutely correct. And it, it's not to say that I'm there yet either, right? Like, it's always, like I'm really passionate about showcasing the importance of agriculture and transport, the two industries that make the world go round. Like that's what I'm really driven to do. But it doesn't mean I'm always going to do it via a book. That is going to evolve as we evolve, as society evolves, as technology changes. So doing it through books has been really great, up until now. But I don't necessarily think that that's the way it's going to be, best received going forward. And I'll continue to alter those things and change it and work that stuff out. But I'm really solid now, when you really sat back and really looked at it, because I did for a long time, as I said at the beginning, I struggled to explain to you what I do for a living, because I didn't sit well with saying to people, oh, I'm a photographer, because to me, that came with all of those assumptions of, oh, you can't make living out of being a photographer. People would say to me, oh, do you shoot weddings and babies? And I'd say, no, I shoot cows and trucks. And they'd just look at me completely perplexed, going, how on earth do you make a living out of that? But when I set my business up, I looked at it at the photography world, and I thought, I don't want a business like a most photographers have. I don't want to worry about where my next client's coming from. I don't want to be under the pressure of shooting bridezillas or trying to make crying babies smile. That was not my field. I chose to focus on, telling the agricultural story because of all of the disconnect. And so nowadays I'm far more into videography than I am photography. So I'm taking that to documentaries and producing stuff in different ways, because I believe that we're more interactive and we're our attention is shorter and that's where we're going. So, but yeah, we are only a little bit off it. And if I really look back to, my younger years, this desire to, showcase and celebrate these people actually comes from not being celebrated myself as a child. So, I was a straight A student, and I was really good at horse sports. I won, New Zealand show jumping champs and all sorts of things. I was very, very successful, and never did I get acknowledged by my own family, So I think that's where this driver of me to do this for other people really stems from.
Yeah. And I think everybody has, one of the things, we talk about in the work we do, right? Everybody has a wound, right? And that's just part of the human experience. I think, like, there's no perfect parenting, there's no perfect society or culture. So part of growing up, I mean, certainly early childhood, adolescence, is having a wound of not being fully acknowledged and recognized. And I certainly know from my experience, I can't really speak for others, that I spent a lot of time really focusing on that, right? And thinking, oh, well, this is because, my mother did this, my father didn't do this, or whatever the story was. And had great stories about it, and could absolutely justify exactly why I was not where I was because of this happened, that happened, whatever. And I think what's interesting, I maybe putting this on you, so it's a question as well. But what I take is there is that stuff, and it kind of like creates an aspect of you, but so what, right? What do you choose to do with it, right? What do you choose to do with it? Because you can live in it and you can just say, well, this is why, and that's it. But or can I choose to? Because I think, like, one of the things I'm really getting is by actually following your truth, whatever that is, right? Whatever you choose that to be, and doing that for others. You end up kind of resolving the stuff that you used to have so much angst about, like the stuff that I think, I couldn't deal with any of that. When I kind of put that aside and said, well, I'm just going to go, focus on the things that I want to do, particularly for others, right? Like putting this podcast out, doing other things, creating parties and playing music and writing and all sorts of other things, leading workshops and helping people with this work. Then it kind of dealt with all the stuff I used to be worried about, and it's really. Am I explaining that correctly?
No, absolutely. And I think for me, writing my The Winding Road, so the story behind, the 4 coffee table books and a lot of the things that I've learned, on my journey, that did a lot more of that for me too. And the reality is, when you're a self-published author and you're dealing with a novel, it's not something that is going to fill your bank account. Let's just be really straight about that stuff. We can make a really good living, doing these things and coffee table books, but books for the most part are a wonderful tool to be a business card and to say to people, this is what I do, and be involved in other things. So whether you have programs or, you want them to sign up for your business, etc. And so The Winding Road, it was as much therapeutic for me to tell that story and to actually put that out there and almost air my dirty laundry. I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to hold on to that stuff anymore. But then to see the people that came forward that say, wow, if I only knew how to, deal with the challenges I had and had that knowledge that, you've shared in the book, I could have dealt with things differently. Or people that just connected with the way in which I became vulnerable to talking about, some of those things. And they say, that talking about anything is the best medicine that we have. So yeah, when I share the stories of other people, it keeps releasing that stuff, for me, and all of a sudden it's not as big a deal anymore.
The thing you mentioned the word, and it sort of was ringing in my mind, was about being vulnerable. And I remember an exercise that we did. It was a couple of years before on a different trip to Africa. We were doing a writer's workshop, and we were working in a small group, and it was a safe environment. We'd been working for a few days. Everybody had training in sort of consciousness and awareness. And it was a well curated and well held space, and we had an opportunity to share something. Like we wrote down, like I think the instruction was something like, write down like the most embarrassing thing that like has ever happened to you, like the thing you're most ashamed of, right? And like I wrote something down, and I thought, oh, actually that's not it, and I crossed it out and wrote something else down. I mean, I'll share it here now, because it was really like, at the time, there was this part of me that was like, oh my God, like this is horrible. Like I can't even like admit, I don't even want to admit this to myself. Let alone to, and I didn't know we were going to share it. And we ended up like, sharing it in a group of, 3 or 4 people, and, 2 or 3 other people kind of laughed, and they were like, oh, is that it? Like, I mean, I sang in a choir when I was at church in my teens. Well, actually from childhood, like from 8 or 9. And then there was a men's choir that when my voice changed, I sang in. And, as a teenager, like I just wanted to go out and like, buy records and, be something. And I was, moving away from kind of like listening to sermons and that. And I would go out during the middle of the sermon, and there was an office that held all the women who would sing in the choir. they kept their purses in there, and I would go and I would take money from their purses, and it was like this, I felt like, like it was like the worst thing, like I had, sinned against God and like, done all this, and I probably, made a few $100 over a couple of months or something, and then eventually somebody copped on and locked the office, and I was like mortified by this, and I shared this, and there's just like total judgment on myself. I'm not particularly proud of it, but like I haven't done it since, and there were like 2 or 3 people who were just like, oh, well, that's cool, like don't worry about that, and equally, somebody else would share something that they had done. It was the most shameful thing that they had done and horrible. And the rest of us would look and be like, yeah, okay, well, that sounds like a human thing to do. Like it, we all make mistakes, and if you're aware of it, that's cool. And I think that the reason I share that is because what I've noticed is, if something comes up in men's work I do, right? Because vulnerability is a very difficult thing. And there's a misnomer, a misconception that vulnerability equals weakness. And what I have found is that vulnerability actually, quite to the contrary, is strength. Because once I own and share something about myself, and it's like I say, like, not that I'm proud of having done that, but that I can own that I can share it, that I can say it and say, yep, this is a part of me. It's not who I choose to be now, but it is something that I have done. Then there's nothing really to come after me for, right? But there are all these things, like we have these secrets, and like, oh gosh, well, if as long as nobody finds out about these secrets I have, then I'm okay, right? And if somebody finds out, well, I'm going to tell your boss, your wife, your partner, your kids, whatever. And if you come out and tell it, well, it's like, well, what does somebody have against you? And not to just like always air your laundry, but there is something that's the power of vulnerability, because like, not only be vulnerable to yourself, but to be vulnerable in a group and sharing, like it takes that that chain, just out, right? It's just like putting it out there.
Yeah, and I think when you have the books like I have, and you often get put on a pedestal because people generally never meet an author, right? Like they get a book, but they don't meet the author. And so when they do, they put you up here. And I hate it with a passion, like hey, I'm a normal person. I'm just like you. We're all doing amazing things. We're all making a difference in the world. This is how I choose to do it. But they've created this perception, and that's how they treat you. And I think that's what's been really big about, telling my story in The Winding Road, is that people have actually gone, oh, wow, like she's actually a real person that has, gone through some really normal things, and things that people related to within family dynamic, within rural industry, within the financial challenges of life, within all sorts of facets that we deal with on a daily basis. And a lot of people, I think, looked at it and went, oh, well, she's a woman from agriculture and she's done this, but then she's told this story, I can tell mine too. And I think it's created a lot more flow-on effect of people being vulnerable and opening up, which I think is really important, when we have so many challenges with, the rising numbers of mental health today, that vulnerability actually really supports that.
Yeah, and I do actually see, I've been talking to some people about this, how there seems to be a shift. I mean, I wouldn't say it's kind of like the kind of default, but there has been a shift over the last couple of years, like on social media, away from kind of the plasticized kind of like, veneer of kind of perfection that got kind of promoted and was quite popular sort of, certainly 3-5 years, several years ago, where you'd look at somebody's Facebook and Instagram post and it's like, oh my gosh, this person is perfect, and I think in a way, like culturally, we've gotten like we're kind of over that.
Yeah, it did go a little bit the other way though, where at one point there it was the classic, I started my business in my parents' garage, and my girlfriend bought me a laptop, and like, we've seen both extremes of that stuff. But yeah, I think the people can see through the filtered world today, and really are connecting with more of the rawness and the realness of people and what they share, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to authenticity, right? And connecting with people that matter to you, because I think there was certainly this idea, like, to be popular, to be something, you had to have 1 million or 10 million or whatever it is, right? And now, because like it happened a lot with it happened a lot in music, where particularly when you got to like the Spotify, iTunes world, where like the major labels don't really have as much power. I mean, it's kind of a side story, but it's an interesting one, because like the major labels that used to release records don't have the power that they used to. And so there were a lot of bands that had to say, well, I just got to go out and connect with the people that matter to me. And if I have 1,000 or 10,000 fans, but they love us to death, that is much, much more important than having 100,000 or 1 million people who just like, yeah, I know them, but it doesn't really mean anything, because it's about connecting, about, creating community, about, having authentic and deep connections with people, whatever field you're in. And I think that's happening, on a sort of small level. I'm sort of noticing it with the podcast, right? The not that we're any huge thing, right? We're not the Joe Rogan Experience or the Tim Ferriss show, or I don't know, whatever else. And yet there are a few people that really, really connect with this, and that's what I'm realizing. There's a part of me that's like, oh, I want to have X number 1,000 or whatever it is to be part of this. But actually, it's more important to have good, meaningful connections with a few,
the right ones,
right people. Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think that's what makes, the Adventures of Self so amazing, is because it is authentic, it is real, it is raw. We're not slicing and dicing, and it's a conversation that everyone can tune into and can get something from if they so choose to, and similarly with the books, that's how I wanted to put it together, and with everything I do. And I think if you really look at it, the people who are shining through today in any industry are those that are connecting on that deeper level with people. You're not just a number, you're not just another notch to them. You're not, adding up to those figures. That they have that customer service, and that connection. And I think that's where long-term support and following and change comes from, because you're dedicated to it, and people resonate.
So I just want to hear, like, because we've kind of been talking about quite a few adventures that you've had, and you're talking about kind of like moving into videography and whatever else comes next. So how do you plan out like whatever adventures come next for you, or maybe what's coming next for you?
I guess I don't plan it quite like it. It's not like something I write on paper and I go, here's where it is. Like, I know what my end result is. So for example, at the moment, I'm actually turning the Grower series, which is my 3rd and 4th book, which we sort of didn't touch on. I'm turning that into a documentary series. So I do have a huge amount of videography from it, but I do need to go back and capture some stuff from certain places to help tell that story in more of a moving visual kind of way. But when COVID hit, my core business of speaking and selling books, just came to a grinding halt, because there was no events and people were focusing on the necessities like toilet paper. And as we discussed earlier, my books are not that. So I had to alter, the way in which I was operating. And I actually ended up going and working on farms. So I ended up doing planting and towing these massive, 80-foot planters around the paddocks. And then I ended up in a harvester for, 3 months and learned to do all of that. But while I was doing it, the multitasking woman in me was flying her drones at the same time, so I was actually capturing a different angle and aspect and a different perspective to agriculture because I was in the bucket seat. And I've actually learned that is a really, just like being on the cattle drive and being on a horse and being there in it, me being involved in the actual day-to-day facets of it is what helps me to capture the best stuff. So it just depends on what's happening. I mean, now that I've driven harvesters and do what I do, I think back to the photograph that's in one of the books of 20 John Deere harvesters lined up in a row harvesting down a paddock, and nothing like that has been done anywhere in the world to that extremity. It was 840 foot wide of crop being cut all at once, and these guys were all hand steering down the paddock, and I'm talking to them on the two-way radio, and then my drone fails, and I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do here? Like, there's $20 million worth of headers making their way down the paddock, and I've got a tech failure. And I looked at the guy who owned the headers, and I was like, do you know anyone that owns a helicopter? And he did. So 20 minutes later, a helicopter arrived. So I'm flying around in a helicopter to get this photo shoot done. And now that I've done the header driving, which is, post this massive photo that I really wanted, I realized what was involved to make those things happen. So, I think engaging and being part of that is the best way for me to capture that stuff. It's a bit like, David Attenborough. He started doing what he was doing before TV was even made. He had this vision and this focus for doing these documentaries and capturing all the amazing wildlife all around the world before televisions existed. And look to where he's got to today. And he's been there in it. And that's why what he captures is like nothing anybody else in the world captures. It's a bit like Bear Grylls. No one does, experiences like Bear Grylls to really throw themselves into it. A bit like Wim Hof and his ice, trips and things like that. Like they are in that stuff. They're not just doing it. They are in it. Yeah. And I've really learned that that's how I capture what I do that is so different from every other photographer and tells that really deep connecting story for people is to be in it.
And I think that is like an opportunity for learning or for listening for anybody, is that to be in life, right? We have this sense of like, well, life is happening out there and I've got to go like find something or it's happening to us, right? Oh, life is happening to me is what they say, right? Yeah, but it's happening through us. That's the opportunity. Like when you're in it, life is happening through you, so you are in the experience. I was watching. It's interesting because that word "in it" or that phrase really sort of triggered me, because I just recently watched My Octopus Teacher, which was kind of quite popular, I think last fall or something on Netflix. I mean, it's absolutely stunning and beautiful story, and it goes to only the person who did it, who created that, could create that. You see where the guy started in his life and how he created it. It's an intimate tale that only he could have created, similar to yours. And what he spoke about, because he had started as a videographer, he's from South Africa, and back in the 80s or something, he went to the Kalahari and was shooting video of the San people, the traditional, hunter-gatherers who have been, living that way for 50,000 years at least. And I had an experience with them as well. They're remarkable people, and they're like the best trackers in the world, right? And they're out in the desert, and they know exactly what's happening on every level. They just look at a plant, look at the way that the sand moves, and they know exactly what it is. And what he shared was that, as a videographer, he was there capturing a scene, and he was very aware that the people that he was capturing were in the environment. Absolutely, to be able to read what's going on, they absolutely had to be in that environment. And he was very aware that as a sort of outsider documentarian, he was not. He was definitely on the outside, capturing, looking in. And that really rattled him. So it was over a number of years that he spent as in videography, really outside of that. And it really shook him, and he eventually left because he just, he wasn't in it. And he went through, a bit of a breakdown and crisis, personal, professional. And it was only when he chose to go back into the water, where he'd grown up, and to just be in the experience of life, of living, that he had this amazing healing. The story is remarkable. And it comes from that, it gets to what we were talking about earlier, authenticity. So yeah, only David Attenborough could be doing what he's doing because he's been in it for however long. 60, 70 years, I don't know how long. So yeah, and you already are in an experience. It's like, but are you living through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that is a really big challenge as a photographer, in the rural industry, because, and the transport industry as well, because media is, they've had an experience with media that has negatively portrayed them. So if you turn up and you're just there to do a photo shoot, you are outside of it looking in, and you don't get an authentic picture either. It's all very staged and framed, and it doesn't feel real, and it doesn't feel comfortable and authentic. So I'm always, and I think that's where my skills from living and working on the land, and living and working in the corporate world with agriculture, and being on farm with farmers every day, has given me that capacity to live it, to be in it with these people, for them to relax and realize that, I know how to portray them in their livelihoods, and that, they can trust me, and I can be part of that. And I think that's been, some of the photographs, I'm not sure whether you've seen them, but there's some crazy photographs of livestock. I've got sheep that fenced cows in, and they're circling around them, and I spelt words with sheep, and I've done some pretty wild stuff with livestock that if I didn't have those stock skills myself, then it probably wouldn't have been possible, because I can be in it and part of creating that to get it to happen with the farmer, who's just like, who's also lives and breathes it, right? But he doesn't see the creativity side of it, because that's his day-to-day life. Yeah. So he moves these mobs of cattle and sheep and harvests these crops and has these amazing backdrops, every day, but they take it for granted because that's their back door, So I come in and I see it, and I'm like, wow, how can we make this amazing and take it? And then you go back to them and show them, and they're like, oh, wow, we didn't realize that was what we live in every day. And you've helped us to appreciate and be more conscious of our own surroundings, so that's awesome too.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful gift. As you say, back to the people that you are connecting with. Cool. Unless you have any parting words for listeners of inspiration and adventure, I think we could go on and on. I think we could have many adventures, and love to have you back on to see, because I know you'll go on to create many, many more amazing things.
I think I think one of the biggest things that I've learned from my experience is that when you're so be it financially or emotionally involved in what you're doing, failure is not really an option. You'll do whatever it takes to jump through all those hurdles and those mountains and those challenges that you face on that journey. And the craziest part about it is when it's all going along really smoothly, you throw yourself back in the deep end because you learn to love the thrill of the unknown. And it's a really great thing. And I think to realize that our own experiences then are the story in the world that we see, right? So your experience with Africa was different to mine because of the experiences you've had growing up in, cities and having to kind of, shut off to all sorts of stuff. Whereas I have that really open one and just don't try and be any of those crazy podcasters that have got millions of followers, because that's not your journey.
Yeah.
It's just like me. I'm not going to try and be the next David Attenborough, or I don't have to sell as many books as the Harry Potter series to feel like I'm successful, like I'm successful in my own right. Like I've really learned not to compare. And even within the books themselves, I've had to learn not to compare them against each other. Just because I've sold less of one than another doesn't mean it's not successful.
We really get caught up in that kind of comparison, whether it's with somebody else or with ourselves. And just quickly, because what you said, failure, quote unquote, it's very, it's only failure if you determine it's a failure, right? I mean, what I learn now is that failure is just an opportunity for learning, right? So, you talk about it's really magical. I mean, you kind of went through it, and I just to highlight, you had a failure of tech where your drone doesn't work, which is failure. And it's like, well, okay, but that's it. But it's an opportunity. It's like, oh, excuse me, do you know anybody who has a helicopter? Yeah, be here in 20 minutes. That's pretty cool. That solves that and gives you an experience of riding in a helicopter.
It's creating at a high level.
Yeah, very, very high level. Very high level. But it's being open to an opportunity, right? And rather than just saying, oh well, what I planned doesn't work, so we'll just have to call it off, and I'll have to do this and wait again, or just toss it away.
But just on that, whenever I've asked, because it's quite funny, I talk about it in The Winding Road, where I say, whenever I find myself having this conversation where I say to someone, you don't know me, but my name's Alice Mabin, and I've got this vision to achieve X, Y, Z. I believe you're the best person to help me. When can we do it? It always happens. There's some the front cover of that book was taken by a policeman on the side of the road, 1,000 kilometres from any town. But you're asking from a place where it doesn't matter if the answer's no. You're so authentic about what you're asking for. There's no ulterior motive. You're not trying to get something out of it. It is like, this is my purpose. This is what I'm driven to do. And it just seems that all of those really, really crazy things that I would ask people would always start off with that sort of conversation, and they would just happen. In fact, they were the easiest photos to get and think challenges to overcome because it was from the heart, it was really sincere. And if they said no, well, that was okay. I was going to find someone else.
Yeah.
Didn't matter,
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Alice. This has been a rip-roaring adventure. We really have barely just scratched the surface. So thank you for coming on, and enjoy the winding road ahead.
I will. It's probably way too expensive for anyone that listens that goes, I'm going to buy books and get them sent to anywhere in the world. They weigh 15 kilos in total, so postage costs an arm and a leg. But if people want to jump on the YouTube channel, they will be able to watch lots of the videos for free. So yeah, cool. Can have a bit of a look at what I get up to.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Alice.
Awesome.